Welcome to PEAC-train like a girl, a podcast by girls in sport, for girls and coaches in sport. We're here to amplify your voice. It deserves to be heard. At PEAC, we are a safe place for girls to hang out, learn, grow, and build community. We empower girls in sport and coaches with knowledge, resources, and support we think is necessary in today's athletic environments to thrive. Join us for bold conversations about experiences for girls in sport. Our discussions will make you laugh, cry, cheer, get frustrated, and hopefully rethink the future of girls in sport for generations to come. Whether you're commuting, walking, at practice, or cleaning your bedroom, take us with you. Follow us. It helps more than you can imagine. Check out our website, and please make sure you share with a female athlete or coach you love. Now, today's a little different because it's going to be me sharing some information about digital wellness and digital flourishing. I know I'm a health and wellness educator, but I also happen to have an expertise in digital wellness. Several years ago, I think it's been 4 or 5 at this point, I made the decision to go study with the Digital Wellness Institute. I saw firsthand the way social media was impacting not just me and my social, emotional, and physical well-being, but I really saw the way it was impacting my athletes. And I wanted to learn more firsthand from the experts who were studying this new phenomenon called digital wellness. And I will tell you, it has been so impactful for me and my relationship with technology. And it's been so impactful for the way I relate and talk to the athletes that I work with. So I really hope that you gain some information and some perspective in this episode. We're going to talk about everything from FOMO, the fear of missing out, and self-comparison, to some tips for athletes and coaches to help them thrive on social media. So thanks so much for being here. Megan, thanks so much for taking the time out of your full schedule to produce this podcast for us. And before we get started talking about digital wellness, I'd love to get just a little caught up with you. Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So you were just sharing with me, Megan is in charge of our podcast, and we've been struggling just a little trying to put together a schedule, which is why we've not been putting out as many episodes.
Yes.
But Megan filled me in on some of the things that are happening in Iowa City, and I thought you guys would be interested in learning also. So fill us in.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I, as well as Annemarie, were both in the thick of our seasons. We just started with our first meet of the season a couple weeks ago. We always start with University of Northern Iowa, and we are racing Nebraska this Friday, our first Big Ten meet. So just in a couple days here, which is super exciting. We've had a little bit of some schedule changes, unfortunate problems with our regular facility pool. So that had to be drained and refilled, which took almost 2 weeks. So we've been kind of all over the place practicing at different locations, but it's good. It's good for everyone. Brought the team a little bit closer together, just looking at adversity all together. So other than that, I would say it has been a very positive, great start to the season. I would say that our team is a little bit of a younger team, so it's been actually super fun as a senior myself to get to know the freshmen more and, lead them in certain ways, because sometimes I'm like, wait, you don't know these, things, and I can do these things, and I forget because I did that, 4 years ago. So it's just funny sometimes to hear their questions and, their eyes are so wide and it's just like, wait, what's going on?
Right. There's a learning curve for sure.
Exactly. So that has actually been a joy for me as well. But the schedule, it's kind of just wake up, go to practice, I'm going to class, going back to practice. So it's a lot of the same old, but I do love it. And it's my final season, so I'm really trying to enjoy it all at the same time.
Yeah. Soak it in, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm curious, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but maybe a little. And I went to a Big Ten school. My husband went to, I guess, what he would call the quote unquote Big Ten school, the University of Iowa. So we do pay attention to some things that are happening in collegiate sports as far as scores and sports, that type of thing. We've been paying a little attention. If people don't know, the Big Ten has expanded. We are now in 4 different time zones, which is crazy when you think about it. But my husband shared with me, just from a football perspective, that when an away team is traveling across those 4 time zones, no one has won yet, I don't think. Like, and I can't, like, so no one quote me on this. I think it's pretty close to being true. I didn't check the scores from this past weekend. It obviously hasn't impacted you yet, but do you guys talk about that? How it would potentially impact you traveling across time zones and what that would look like?
That is so interesting you say that, because for some reason I have not thought about that at all. But I know, like, personally, when I've traveled to a different time zone, I am super out of it. And we just had University of Washington football team come here this last week.
That's what I'm saying. So Iowa won, right?
Yes, Iowa won by like a lot, a good amount. So that is so interesting, because I feel like that definitely has something to do with it. Like,
yeah, there's some studies out there. Sleep is huge, and there's a few studies out there. I went and did some digging. And so sleep is one thing. So obviously sleep is so impactful. There's hundreds of studies out there on that. But as far as different time zones, there's I could only find a couple studies. And what the most of the studies showed that I could find was that when teams played at their regular time, the schedule didn't matter in time zones. But when they played at a different time, it did matter. So let's say in California, it's noon, and on the East Coast it's 4. So if they played the game at noon on the East Coast, it wouldn't be impactful because it's the same time. But if they played at 4, which is really, I'm doing the math wrong, but you understand what I'm saying. No, oh my God, we're doing math on the podcast. It's bad.
I'm trying to think. So if our past game this past weekend was an 11 a.m. game, which is, Iowa football has played that many times, but that would be 9 a.m. for Washington. So that is so interesting.
Right. And there's no way they've played a game
never in their lives. That is so interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So listen, I know that money drives sports. I'm not naive, but when I first heard of the Big Ten has obviously gone through many iterations over the time I graduated, back in before technology and lights, but when I saw they were going through 4 time zones, I'm like, this is just not good for these student athletes. But I mean, from an exposure perspective, I get it. But from an overall health and wellness perspective, I just don't see the benefit. But that's just my opinion.
No, I'm so glad you just shared that point with me, because that is not something I thought of. And just like I said before, off of personal experiences, I feel like I need like 2 days of like some stretching, a ton of water, some shake out, you know what I mean? So
I agree.
That is fascinating. Yeah.
Well, now that Megan and I have solved all the problems with the Big Ten, we'll move on. I don't know if there's anybody in the hierarchy that wants to hear this, but these are our thoughts. So we will migrate to digital wellness. We are coming off of a lot of conversations. I love that every month is kind of assigned, a thought. There's a day for everything out there now. I love that calendar where it can be everything from, broccoli day to, coffee day.
Yeah.
But, mental health is certainly not something to giggle about, and certainly it deserves the attention it is being given. Social, emotional, mental well-being is important. It's important for all of us. And those things, social, emotional, and mental well-being, also is impactful to our physical well-being, right? They all go hand in hand. They do work synergetically. They do work together. And I think that's something important to realize. I'm not really sure people give the pause to technology. And I think specifically we're going to talk about social media, but certainly technology, this always on culture where you can be, 24/7 in the work environment because somebody can email you or text you or call you on any given time. Certainly technology is impactful there, but I do want to kind of circle around social media and the impact it plays with anxiety, depression, and mental health issues. Have you ever thought about that, about what social media does, both positively and negatively for you personally?
Yes, I definitely have. I think from an athlete's perspective, it has been super fun to be able to connect with so many girls in my sport community, like throughout the nation. And when I
Sure.
was younger, traveling to meets, I was like, oh, I made a new friend. Let's follow each other on Instagram. So I think that has been a super fun part of it. And, trying to keep up with, what they're up to and what they've been doing and their teams, which also I do feel like has a little bit of, a negative downside to it because
Sure.
I feel like there's this added pressure to
Yeah.
constantly showcasing yourself or
Sure.
showcasing that, not even from an athletic standpoint, even just that you're having fun and you're loving college and you're just loving life. And I can see that lead to, the stress and the self-doubt and just this overall pressure that's just kind of on your shoulders.
Yeah. It's definitely a double-edged sword.
Mhm.
And first of all, thank you for being open and candid about that. I
Mhm.
do want to recognize that before social media came into existence, there was plenty of ways for body surveillance and self-comparison
Mhm.
and emphasis on, different trends. That certainly existed before, TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. I mean, those things certainly existed. I don't want to pretend that they didn't.
Right.
I think the difference was we could turn them off, right? You didn't have to look at a magazine or you didn't have to watch television. And certainly you weren't on a home computer because they did not exist. You went home from school and you weren't texting with your friends back and forth. You probably weren't even talking to your friends, quite frankly, because there was one phone in the house, right?
Yes.
And everybody took turns talking on the phone.
Mhm.
And so your social interactions happened when you were at school or on the school bus. It wasn't this 24/7
Mhm.
thing. And I think that's where we've lost a little perspective.
I
And
strongly agree.
yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. So when you talk about, there were a few things in what you said. When you talk about, hey, the good part is I can meet somebody when I'm traveling to Nebraska and
Mhm.
we can connect and we can be quote unquote friends on social
Mhm.
media and follow each other and see each other, what they're doing. And I think there's a couple things there. Like, first of all, is just because you follow someone on social media, whether you've met them or not, does
Mhm.
that make you friends?
Right.
And then, okay, so if we have 1,000 people, quote unquote, following us, are those thousands of people our friends?
Right.
And I mean, because really they aren't, right? Like, I mean, let's just be real. They're not. They're your followers and you may have some type of connection with them, but we have a connection with our barista at Starbucks. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to be nice to them, but they're not our friend, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
They don't know the intimate details of our life. We're not
Mhm.
sharing our secrets with them and we aren't trusting them to have a conversation. So I think some of it is we misuse the word friend. I think
Mhm.
that's something. I think if we changed it to followers, it would be different, right? These are people that are following you.
Yeah.
And I think the social comparison thing is real. Like, here's one of my latest examples. And when we finish a meet now, it used to be that we finish a meet and you would, let's say we're running a fresh off, a JV and a varsity
Mhm.
race and we finish the meet and, I'm coaching because I'm the head coach. I'm not
Mhm.
the varsity coach or the JV coach. I'm at all the races. So I'm never back at camp. I'm always
Right.
on the course looking and I'm certainly not looking up the results in between. I'm really being present for
Mhm.
everybody that's out there racing. By the time I get to camp, everybody knows what we've done. They know, like, if we won or we lost or what place we took. And it's like, it's so deflating to me as a coach. It used to be this thing that was secret and we would, wait and it takes 20 minutes for things to get approved. And then you would share it. Well, by the time I come back to share it, everybody already knows. And it's like, And people are like, well, that's a benefit. I'm like, is it? Is that a benefit that they know 20 minutes faster than they would have known 4 years ago? I'm like, I just don't see it as a benefit. I see it as they've already compared their times to everybody else in the race, and they're either completely elated, but most of the time they're completely deflated.
Right.
Like, let's be real.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm struggling with this. I'm not sure that much information and that much data at this very moment. I'm not saying the data is not going to be relevant in 4 days when we take the time to process it and pick things apart and look at things that can be relevant. I'm saying that constant input of data before you even had a chance to get through the finish line and go through your cool down, you've already realized, have you won, have you lost? What was your second mile split? Where could you have done better? Like, to me, that's not helpful. I don't know. What do you think?
I haven't actually reflected about this 100%, but the more that you've been talking, I've been thinking about it. I myself don't love to know this information personally just until after, I've done my own cool down and things like that. And I've, talked to a coach. But for sure, when I done with the race and my teammates and I were we were warmed down in a separate pool, there are at least 90% of them grabbing their phones quick, going on the app that will show you your things. So 100%, I can picture this so perfectly in my head. And I do think even, in addition to that, it kind of takes away a little bit of, waiting to hear the team scores and waiting to hear that, the announcement, like, kind of like that fun team aspect. So
completely.
So even on top of the comparison and, your individual self, it's a whole team thing too that I feel.
Completely.
So yeah.
And as a coach, there's so little I can do or say then at that point, because we're no longer processing what I noticed or what my expertise is. You're processing your individual result. And I don't know. And I'm not saying there isn't a benefit to some of this stuff. I just don't think the benefits outweigh the harm at this point. That's just, and listen, as far as information goes, if they even just didn't post it live, if they just even waited, I don't know what the time is, an hour, 4 hours, something. If they just waited to share it, to me, there's that information becomes more relevant and more useful, because right now people are just looking at the result and they're tossing that away. They're not even focusing on the benefits of the information.
Exactly. It's just, you look at the number and then it's an immediate good or bad thought.
Yeah. So that's one of my things and that's an app. That's not social media. Those are those apps that, sports like swimming and or track and field or cross country can use, and there's benefit to them, but that's one of the downsides, especially with high school athletics. I'm like, I can't believe you put this stuff up live, because before I've had a chance, parents are commenting and consoling and kids know. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I might as well throw in the towel, because there's nothing I can say until practice on Monday, because people are all, caught up in their emotions at this point. So I don't know. That's just kind of some of my things there. And as far as the social media piece of it is, there is just this, the FOMO, the fear of missing out, or the self-comparison. And one of the terms we learned at the Digital Wellness Institute, so it's not my word, I'm using the word there, is this word called sharenting. And it is legitimately the best word I feel like I've learned in the past 5 years. And it's parents oversharing information about themselves and information about their children and information about their families. And some of it is, and they've done some studies on this, and they've done some surveys on this, and 70% of parents are saying they're trying to share information about their kids to loved ones. And to me, I'm like, send an email, send a Christmas card, or pick up the phone. That's just that. But 40% are saying they're trying to showcase their kids' accomplishments, whether that's an A on the biology test or, getting a W against Nebraska in the, 50-yard free. I don't know what that it is. But why are we sharing that information? And so part of it is, and this is some of the feedback I'm getting from young adults, is that then kids feel they have to live up to that people, strangers, know so much personal information about them, when their birthdays are, where they go to school. And it not only makes sometimes the child feel like, oh, that's weird. That stranger knows it's my birthday. I didn't tell him it was my birthday. But some of it is just unsafe. We're giving so much information away about our children and our loved ones that should be private information. So have you ever heard of that word, sharing?
I haven't heard of that word, and I do really like that word. That's perfect. But
have you seen that before?
I have. I mean, I am thankful that my parents are not into the social media scene, but I have seen and been in conversations, after post meet where we're in a group and I'm catching up and saying hello to other parents that I haven't seen, or, even friends of friends where they're asking me about something from a couple weeks ago. And I'm just like, wait a minute, how do they know what I was doing a couple weeks ago? So at that first, it's like, wait, a little bit shocking. And then I'm just like, how, what?
Yeah.
So I have definitely been in those scenarios one too many times, because I feel like I'm normally around the same crowd every single day. And obviously because we're all living the same schedule. So they know exactly what we're all doing. But
sure,
kind of in a situation where it's someone that this is maybe my second time meeting or first time, and they, know what I've been up to. I'm like, oh gosh.
Right.
So
how does that make you feel, honestly?
Honestly, a little bit, what's the right word here? Like, too exposed? Not that I'm extremely private, person.
Sure.
It's just a little bit of my information is definitely out there somehow.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting because I went back and looked before, and I do this periodically because I do presentations on digital wellness and digital flourishing for, girls in sport. I also work with the Girl Scouts, which has been super fun. I do give information, and we'll get into that, with athletes that are looking to be recruited and tips for coaches. So one of the things that I did when Facebook, because that was the first kind of animal that came out, first came out, it felt super benign. It felt like this thing. And listen, I'm not telling you that I didn't share things about my kids on Facebook. I did. It's been forever. I think the last time I shared any personal information, it's been probably 6 years. It's been since before I went to the Digital Wellness Institute. At some point, I got to the place where I was like, this just doesn't feel right.
Right.
I also knew from a business perspective that if I wasn't in the game somehow, whether that was on LinkedIn or on a website or on this thing now called Instagram, I wasn't going to be as impactful. And I knew that. So I'm also careful about sharing my personal stories, and for sure the personal stories of my children and my, home environment. I'm careful about that. I think people can figure out a little where I live, mostly because of where I coach. But other than that, there's not a lot of information people can find out about me. They don't know, if I'm married or unmarried. They know I have kids, but they couldn't pick out a name. They certainly don't know where they live. I mean, I'm not being private or this but I am being aware that my story isn't their story.
Yeah.
And that my story can impact somebody else's story, right? So those are things I became really careful of. And I get a little uncomfortable when people share information, good or bad. I mean, I'll have people that'll be like, my child suffers from ADD, or my kid was bullied at school and they're going through. And my thought is, it's awesome that you're reaching out and trying to get the help and the resources you need, but you've now publicly exposed your child's experience to a bunch of people that don't even know your child, or if they do know your child, are going to label them forever. I mean, I don't know. What do you kind of think there?
I would agree with that. I do think that especially coming from a parent. If this was me and I was, you know, I feel like I would just want to have this as a one-on-one conversation if I thought it was
Yeah.
significant, with a coach, with whatever individual was needed for the conversation, but most definitely not a whole group, because what you just said at the end there, the labeling, that is something that is tough because that does not go away, I feel like.
It doesn't.
Once that's a thought in someone's mind, especially now with, all the other factors like we've been talking about social media, I feel like that's, that's kind of like a stuck thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the other thing with, Facebook, when I made the decision to kind of come off of there, it became to me a political landscape. But more important than that, when I go back to think about how Facebook started, it started as a way to rate girls. Are they hot or not hot? And I'm like, wait a minute. That's how this thing started. And that's what it feels like. Social comparison and the body surveillance and the, emphasis on social trends. That's what it started as. It did not start as a way to connect people. That is a misstatement. That is not what it started as. It started as a way to judge whether a girl was hot or not hot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, yikes. So, running a business or a company off of social media, I do think from a small business perspective has positive impact for me because I don't need to spend money on marketing or advertising. It's just something that takes 10 or 15 minutes of my time, type of thing, right? And also just to promote, sport or promote your school. I think there's benefit in that. I don't want to lose sight of that. I think there's a space for both athletes and coaches to flourish on social media if they use it the way that it was. I don't know. I shouldn't say it was intended to be because I don't think it was. So I want to, the way it should be used, I guess, in my opinion. There's a way I think to get recruited online and to have an online presence, but I do think that requires, that you as both a coach and an athlete, that you stay honest, that there's some sense of humility, that you share what matters to you, right? That you speak your voice, but you do it in a way that is kind and safe, that you support your school, that you support your school's account, that you're holding teammates accountable. So I do think that there's a way, because I think both you and I know, particularly now with NIL, there is a way for athletes and coaches to monetize off of these platforms. So what are kind of some of your thoughts there?
I do. It's interesting because I feel so strongly about both sides of these things, because what you just said about if there's a way that it's being used in the way that, it should be used, there's visibility and brand building and personal image opportunity that you can, do for yourself, and you can increase, your visibility beyond just your local area and help you reach colleges that you may not, have previously even known about yourself, or they didn't know about you.
Sure.
But I think that, as an athlete, if you're posting and you're showcasing yourself as a leader, you're disciplined, you have a great character. It's just hard because once again, that's just on an app. So that's where I feel like share calls and the face-to-face has to come in.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's just such positives and negatives to both sides, because once you kind of lean towards the other side or look into the other side, it's just this added pressure, the constant need to update these followers, impress coaches, compete with other people for, same spots on a college team, which leads back to that stress and anxiety that we were talking about, and how, and recruiting gets younger and younger, I swear. So
yeah, it does.
Expose these young girls to criticism or negative comments right away and early on in their athletic careers, which is just, I don't know. I just think that it's so hard to manage this whole thing, because how do we make sure that everyone ever is using it in the right way, which is just, impossible. But I really do see both sides, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think that part of it is, whether or not through government regulation or not, there's an age limit. I do think there's a benefit to that. That's just my opinion. the research, the studies, the data that's out there that shows that girls who are exposed to social media have a lower self-image. They have more social comparison, anxiety, body surveillance than other people. But that is for real. That is not fake stuff. And so I do think that while I think there needs to be some regulations, I also think that parents need to kind of grow a pair. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I think at some point parents need to say, you know what? I don't know what the age is, but it's not 12. You know, maybe the age is 15, maybe it's 16. At some point, parents need to say, no, you're not getting an Instagram or a TikTok or whatever new app comes out until this age. And again, I don't know what the age is, but maybe 15 when you get your permit and they're old enough to be able to be in charge of a car.
Right.
And people are like, really? You're comparing social media to a car? You bet I am. You know the stuff that your kids can do and see online. And if you don't, you need to do your due diligence and figure it out, because the stuff your kids are exposed to, everything from porn to drug sales to, you know, bullying. And I mean, like, bullying's like almost the little thing when you look at the other stuff they can do and see. And if you don't realize that as a parent, I think that's kind of on you at this point.
I could not agree more. Seriously.
Yeah. And I know I don't normally get like kind of harsh, but this to me feels like, well, I don't want my kid to be left out. At the expense of what?
Exactly.
At the expense of what?
There have been, I think, what we've seen in the last 3, 4, 5 years, there have been way too many cons and negatives that have outweighed any, you know what, like,
Completely.
For benefit.
Completely.
And the amount of people, friends that I talk to my age, they're like, I wish social media was never even invented, because it keeps getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can it be worse than that? And then it's the next situation. So I feel about this as well. And I could not agree more.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, you know, part of the thing is that as you go through the aging process, your brain does become more resilient and more able to handle more. That's the way evolution works. And again, if we can't take a pause and understand the same reason our 12-year-old, you know, can't drive a car, you know, is the same reason our 12-year-old shouldn't be exposed to social media, because their brains are not equipped to react that fast and sift through and cipher through what is real and what is not real, what's important, what is not important. And some of that is, let's give these kids their childhood back. Like, let them, you know, go out and play and get dirty, get cell phones out of the bedroom. So those are some super helpful tips. As a family, make a decision about the age that your kids are getting a phone. I mean, I think kids get phones too early, period, phones. But if they're getting a phone, get a phone without an app on. That's the easiest thing that you can do. You know, make sure your kids are not on social media until they get into high school. That's an easy fix. That's an easy solution. Make sure you're paying attention to what your kids are doing online. You can monitor that. And when you say, you know, well, your kids need privacy, when else does a parent say that an 11-year-old or a 15-year-old needs privacy? Like, that is not what it is. You're looking for things. You're looking, you know, is my child potentially using drugs or smoking cigarettes or in a harmful relationship? That includes social media.
It very much includes social media. It's a large part of it.
Yeah. Get cell phones out of kids' rooms. And when that is my biggest tip when I walk away, at the very least. And they're like, well, how are you going to wake up? And I literally am like, tell me you're kidding. Buy an alarm clock. Like, I haven't had a phone in my room ever. Buy an alarm clock. Like, well, my alarm is on my phone. Great. You have an alarm on your phone. Now put it somewhere else and then buy an alarm clock. This is not rocket science. This is not hard stuff. And, you know, some of it, I just think we have to take a step back and realize your kid is not going to be left behind socially by not being exposed to social media. But if your kid is exposed to social media, what we do know, exactly what you're saying, is that it can, at a younger age, have more harm than good. There are way less benefits. And so that to me is a simple thing as far as, athletes, as far as, the recruiting process. The big takeaways are continue to be honest. Don't over exaggerate or don't overstate, continue to share what's important about, you and your sport, but don't overshare personal information. Stay humble, because you're only as good as your last event or race or whatever. And that's not, at the end of the day, that is not who you are. We're not statistics and numbers. So just that humility piece, I think, plays a big part. Support other athletes, support your own school. Like that's, when you're only promoting your own social media and your own image, your school is the one who's giving you those opportunities, right? So I think that's important. Same thing with coaches. Coaches shouldn't be oversharing information about athletes. They shouldn't be criticizing athletes online. And you do see that, right? So some of that is, if you're a coach, I think you need to set the standard. I think you need to not overshare. You need to continue to be honest, be humble, share things about your practices, share things about your team building nights, about athletic performances or accomplishments, but also share when your athletes do something like, volunteer at the soup kitchen. I mean, to show that there's two sides to everybody and that we are multifaceted and we are much more than the numbers we're putting up on the scoreboard.
Oh, I love that. I could not agree more. I don't know the last time, I was just going to briefly say earlier, I just don't know the last time I've heard the words humility and recruiting hand in hand. I think that needs to be way more often. So I love it. And I very much agree.
Yeah, I agree with you. We can be confident and secure in who we are and still deliver it in a way that feels humble.
100%. Yes.
I agree with that. Well, thank you for the huge pivot and sitting here talking about social, emotional, mental well-being and how technology can either help support that or hurt that. It really meant a lot for me to kind of share some of that and get some insight for somebody who is in the thick of it. So I appreciate your time. Don't forget, if you're listening, to follow us on Instagram, which is hilarious. We just talked about all the hard social media. We really do try to keep relevant information out there, and we try not to overburden your feed. So yes. we recognize the irony. Share our episodes. We really think we're making an impact on PEAC-Train Like a Girl. We're sharing information that we think is relevant to you today for you to thrive in today's environment. Thank you so much for being here. We can't